בראשית ברא אלוהים את השמיים ואת הארץ. That's the first sentence from the most published book in the world. That is, of course, the Bible. And the impact of the Bible on the world is, of course, tremendous in terms of theology and philosophy and question of morality. Even the book of Genesis, the story of Genesis, has helped shape our collective imagination of how we envision, how we imagine the next world that is heaven. And the complexity of the stories is really fascinating to me. I mean, we all know that God created the sky and the earth and the day and the light and the plants and then the animals along with the humans. Unless, of course, you're reading the second chapter of Genesis, where God created the sky and the earth, and then immediately he created the man and the woman. Or the fact that God created the man and the woman in his own shape in order to rule and conquer the world. Unless, of course, you're reading the second chapter of Genesis, where God created the man from the dirt and the woman from the man's rib in order to guard God's creation. And the difference between the two stories, of course, created a lot of different discussion and arguments between theologists and researchers, although nowadays those people agree among themselves that these stories are actually complementing stories. And another thing I really find fascinating when it comes to the Bible, and don't worry, you are in the correct presentation, is the idea of the canonization of the scriptures. As we know, the Bible was not written in one day, nor was it written by one single author. In fact, most of the authors, we just don't know who they were. So along the years, different people, different committees gathered around in order to edit the different stories and also decide which story is holy enough in order to be in the Bible. And the version of the Bible, as we know it today, was actually sealed about 2,000 years ago. And even typos that are in the Bible are still copied. Nowadays, you cannot change anything. In fact, if you'll do one single mistake in the entire book, then that book is considered invalid, and it actually needs to be buried in a special ceremony. And considering the implication of each book, each story, each phrase, even each word, it makes me think what would have happened in a different world where the sealing, that canonization of the scripture, that sealing of the Bible would have looked different, meaning if that committee would have chosen different books or different stories. How would that impact our world? How would it impact our philosophy, our questions of morality? Would we have more wars or less wars? A huge time leap into 2005. In the picture, we see Linus Torvalds, mostly known as the creator of Linux. But I want to talk about what he did at 2005. But before we do that, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. I assume most of the people here are developers, but even if you're developers, I just want to remind something, that it's really, really hard to make computers do what we want them to do. We need to use different spells, different weird words from dead languages, some black voodoo, some magic in order to do that. And it's even harder to do that as a team. And in order to do that as a team, we have what we call version control. And this is a typical schema of a version control, SVN, for example. Other people above the age of 30 over here? I see, yeah. So that's CVS for the senior citizens among the crowd. So there's the server, which is like the canonical repository. It has the canonical copy of all our files, and we have different clients, and each client, according to their permission, according to their access, can see certain files and write to certain files. And obviously, that schema didn't work so nicely for Linus, and in 2005, he decided he wanted to write Git, which we all love to love. And the idea of Git, what Linus did is he took the ideology of open source and he actually built the technology around it. And the most important thing probably about Git is the fact that the code is always open, meaning that once you have access to the code, you can see everything. You can see all the files. You can see all the history. And thanks to the hash, the set of different characters and digits over here, every little change has a hash, meaning this is the unique identifier of that change. And thanks to that hash, people, developers from Tel Aviv, Austin, Paris, or wherever, are able to work on the same files, and later on, we are able to merge it pretty easily. Of course, GitHub is somewhat responsible for the success of Git, and we can see here, for example, a screenshot of the Linux repository, but that's not the interesting part about Git. In order to find the interesting things about this technology, we need to look at the more extreme use cases of how people are using Git. So this is a repository of the German law book. Some dude decided he wanted to put the entire German logbook in a repository. And we're able to see each change in the law. So on the red, this is the diff. On the red, we see everything that was removed. On the green, we can see everything that was added. And we have an entire context. We know when it was changed, why it was changed, what led to the change of the law. In this table, you can see the Israeli annual budget. I can assure you that even if you knew how to read Hebrew, you'd still not understand it, right? That's the government's idea of making things transparent, right? You probably know it from your countries as well. And a bunch of geeks decided to take this information and process it and massage it and scrape it and basically show it in a way that human beings are able to consume. And their next project is actually having some kind of a diff. So not only you're able to see exactly the budget of a certain subject and of a certain sector, you're actually able to click it and drill down and actually see the diff and understand how the budget changed, and maybe it will make people more educated and lead them to better vote next time. So Git and GitHub and this entire technology is actually helping us in, I wouldn't say necessarily revolutionize the world, but change the world. I mean, we suddenly realized we are able to make our governments more transparent. But, it led me think, what would have happened, again, in a weird world where the Bible would actually have been still written today, that the sealing wouldn't happen? Would we see something like that, a user called Jesus, the real one, going into a repository and see that somebody forked from Moses, the Bible? And if you're asking yourself, who is brave enough, who is godly enough, to fork the Bible from Moses in order to change it, then of course the answer is Chuck Norris. Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's pretty incredible, but it gives me great pleasure to invite Mr. Chuck Norris. One day it will happen. It will raise the bar so high, I'll quit. I'll stop the presentation. So my name is Amitai Burtin. I am the CTO and co-founder of the Gizra. The title of the presentation is the Gizra Way, but before we understand what is our way, a bit about Gizra. So we exist for 6 years. We're about 20 people, which is the bullshit way of saying that we're exactly 17 people, because there's no way to say about. We are 15 developers, 1 office administrator, and 1 project manager. We basically killed the middle management, literally. And part of our clientele list is, for the past 2 years, we've been working with Harvard on building a distribution called Open Scholar, which is running basically the entire sites of the faculty and departments. We build projects and consult for the European Union. Acquia took us to help them build Drupal Commons. Commerce Guys took us to help them build Commerce Kickstart. Thanks you for that, Ryan and Boyan. And basically, that's like the really 60 seconds to say that we really know well how to build website and web system. But I'm not here to talk about the business entity called Gizra, but rather to talk about the way that we are approaching projects. And if there is one single slide you're going to listen to, please make it that slide, which is about transparency. So when it comes to transparency, I always like to show this slideshow. This is a screenshot from YouTube. It's the magician Penn and Teller, if you know them. They do magics, and then they explain how they do the magic. So over here, they have this magic trick where they have the balls and the cups, and they move it, and the balls, you can come in, that's fine. And the balls are, you know, hiding and showing, and they do it pretty good. And then they say, and of course, you must never, ever do it with a transparent cup. And then, obviously, they do it with a transparent cup. And this is where it becomes really, really interesting. Because even though the cup is transparent, they're doing it in a magnificent way. You just cannot see the balls hiding and showing. And the thing is, because they knew it's transparent, it really forced them to reach a really high skill when they are providing, high skill when they are doing this magic. Well, I told you to listen to that, to the previous slide. But if you're gonna listen to one slide, it should be this one. Because transparency isn't enough. And I'm going to give that through an example of the closing session we're going to have here in the DrupalCon in a few hours, and assuming they will follow this tradition. So in the end of the closing session, they're going to talk about the budget. So they're going to show us a slide, and they will start going over the different sections. So they will tell us how much the convention center costs, which is pretty interesting. And they will tell us how much the internet costs, which is somewhat interesting. And then they will start going and reading the entire breakdown of the budget. And this will be 15 minutes of agony, of darkness, where you will feel dead from the inside. Honestly, they will reach envelopes and paper clips. If you've already attended DrupalCon, you know that I might be a little exaggerating, but not too much. And that slide is to show that transparency isn't enough. What we're seeing over here, one of the developers is updating an issue, and what we have here, you're not seeing blurry, it's okay. What we have here, we have the actual markup, the actual HTML, and on top of that, we have the JPEG that the designer provided with some opacity. So we actually see what we call a layered output. So the developer added some notes where I finished most of the elements. I just need to arrange the logo and the carousel. But he could actually omit that, because the information is really, really clear over here. You are able to see it. So what I'm trying to say is being transparent isn't enough. You really need to be accurate. Now, maybe seeing that image is, you know, it looks a little silly. Even though it's really silly, maybe the example, still so many projects, I don't see that. And, you know, I just see people explaining in words what they did, or even words they just, you know, throw a bunch of CSS over there. But that's probably the most accurate way of doing that. But again, the idea of this slide isn't to teach you how to do layered output. The idea of the slide is to make you think how every time you communicate with your client, with the developer, with the designer, all the stakeholders, how to do it in the most accurate way. Sorry. So open source is a scale. Okay, to explain the developers between you, it's not Boolean, right? It's not true, and it's not true or false. And for example, we all use open source tools, right? But most of our projects are actually closed source. So what we can see over here, that's the new Gizra.com site. This is how you consume it through the browser. But there is also the code itself in GitHub. So I wouldn't say it's really open source. It's mostly in the public domain, right? I don't think somebody will pick it up. But the idea is that we're trying to approach every project that we have with the same open source mindset we approach, with the same mindset we approach open source. So basically, the Gizra way is adaptation of different methodologies. That's a word I always find hard to say. And it's basically about best practices. And best practices need to be practiced, meaning we're always trying to force ourselves, take ourselves to the next level of practicing those best practices. So even taking our site, and that was easy because it's our site, but we also approach our clients and we tell them, listen, let's try, if possible, to even open source or put in the public domain the internals of the site. And obviously, the first question that arises is, what about security? Or if you remember the slide with the transparency, and I hope you remember, because it's like, well, 3 slides ago. If you don't, then you need to see a physician. But the idea is that if I put it in the public domain, then obviously I'm aware of security issues, right? I mean, I even do more than I would have done in a closed source project. But the presentation isn't about making every project you have open source. No, it's about using the same mindset you would approach open source into your closed source projects. So another lesson we learned from open source is obviously coding standards. And you can see that as an example of standards. And we know it from the development world. We've seen so many different arguments. What is the right thing? 2 spaces, 4 spaces, or a tab? And of course, the correct answer is, it doesn't matter, as long as you're consistent with that. I'll give you an example. You see here a function. I can assure you it doesn't really exist. And even if you're not a developer, it's not very hard to understand what it's doing. It just basically returns true, always. However, if I would send this piece of code to the Drupal committee that decides which patch is holy enough, they would kick me away, they will take all my ranks and shame me in public. Because I have here 3 mistakes. First, I have an extra line. I have a typo in the word implements, and God forgive me, I forgot the dot in the end of the sentence. And we see that the code actually didn't change, right? The code is OK. But the fact that I got it wrong actually added what we call a code smell, right? Something is wrong over here. So if I'm looking at that code and I say, OK, whoever wrote that, the developer that wrote that, he wasn't paying attention to all the details in the comments. Maybe that developer wouldn't pay attention also to security concerns, to the API of Drupal, and so on. So basically, coding standard is probably the first thing when you provide your first patch. That's the first thing you hit, and you hate it, and you don't understand why people insist on it so much. And what we need to understand is that the best practices are actually hiding inside them. The coding standards are actually hiding inside them the best practices. Fail often, fail fast, fail cheap. This is probably the same approach that Drupal 8 is taking, right? So I no longer know if I'm cynical or not. Like I lost it. So this approach basically says, if you don't know what it means, that instead of spending 1 year and throwing money at your project and developing it, and after 1 year realizing that nobody cares about your product, is work for it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, connect it even with Spit, put it out there, and start getting some feedback. And we've added another sentence. Our project manager said something very right, that the problem of specs, all those PDF books, that 99% of the specs have more authors than readers, right? So lots of people are writing it, and in the end, there's one small developer who doesn't know what to do. He got this book like laid on his table. And it's not that I'm saying you don't have nothing to do with those books. Luckily, there is an Irish artist called Jorge Russell. You can send her those books, and she can do magnificent stuff with it. All right, so let's have that embarrassing talk about automatic tests. Who thinks automatic tests are good? Raise your hands. Don't be lazy. Come on, it's an intimate session. I can see, I know the names of all of you. So let's say even if you didn't raise your hands, you're probably too lazy. And I mean, everybody thinks that automatic tests are good. So who does automatic tests for all their projects? All, 100%, all. Oh my God, what a surprise. For the viewers at home that do not see the audience, no one raised their hands, surprisingly. So let's talk about it. What we see over here, this is BHAT test. BHAT test is actually the word in English you see here. The computer is smart enough to understand it and translate it into actual automatic tests. So this is something from Open Scholar, from Harvard's Open Scholar. And you can see that the scenario we are testing here is really silly. I mean, verify that the sticky publication appear first on each section. And of course, right, it's sticky. Why shouldn't it become why should it move? And all the developers know, because we tend to have bugs in the system. So it's better to write a test for that. And when it comes to test, I always say that you need to find your balance, meaning don't give up. We all agree that tests are good. So you can even write one single test, right? Just, have Travis or whatever build your installation profile, assuming you're building everything in installation profile. And if you're not, that's probably a topic for another conversation, but you should. And build the installation profile and just have just one single test, a silly test that checks that the user can log into the system. And that test, that silly test, is actually asserting so much more than not having that. And the next year, when I'll ask that same question, you'd be able to raise your hand. On the other hand, and this is the important part about finding the balance, is don't listen to the purists. I'm definitely not a purist. So purists say about BHAT testing, for example, that that's actually the site's documentation. But it's not. It's not, because we have a budget, we have a deadline. It will never be the actual documentation. And also, don't be frightened by test-driven development. It's okay. Let's confess, nobody is doing it. And that's fine, as long as you'll find the balance. So Harvard, when they contacted us 2 years ago, they had a stability problem. OpenScholar is a big system, and they had a release like once every 2 months, and releases were really, really hard, and there was a lot of regression and so on. And the thing I told Ferdy, the project lead in OpenScholar, 2 years ago, I told him, let me write one single test. That's it. 2 years later, we have a crazy test suite, by far the biggest test suite I know in any Drupal distribution. We actually test Apache Solr on every commit, like crazy, 50 minutes. But who cares? It's somebody else doing that. And we were able to reduce the release cycle to every 3 weeks. We actually overhauled the entire access system in 1 week, like something you'd probably not even dare to do if you wouldn't have those tests in place. OK, so over here we have a completely imaginary graph. So some time ago, we were consulting another big company in Israel in a project that they did. So we were with them, I think, for 4 or 5 months. And it was really a few hours every month. It wasn't much. It was like looking at a train accident from far away. You can, shift a little bit, but not to do too much. So over here in the graph, we can see the blue line is not the Gizra way, and in the red line, we can see the Gizra way. And we can actually see 2 interesting stuff over here. First of all, the blue line reminds us of a snake eating an elephant from The Little Prince. But I told the joke. But the second interesting stuff that we can see here is that actually after, that's the camera, I should turn the place, but imagine my hand over there. So in the red line, the Gizra way, we can see that the first 3 months, there's more effort to be done, right? Because we're building everything as installation profile. We're starting to write tests. Rather than, the first 3 months in a project is so easy. You just throw a bunch of models, configuration, views, panel, and so on. But after 2-3 months, then starts the regression. And then we can see this is the sweet point of, I would say, normally in 3 months, where you can start to see the benefits of the Gizra way, of following all those best practices, again, in a balanced way, not trying to overdo. Code review, right? The same thing you do in every Drupal project. What we see over here, this is, again, GitHub. We like to work in GitHub. We actually have all the stakeholders, everybody, the designer, developer, the client. Even if they don't care or they're not technical, they're in GitHub. They're able to see the code. And over here, what we can see, I review the code. I'm saying this looks wrong, and the developer below that says, I fixed it, or something like that. And that's something that you might say, OK, so if the client can see that, then he might be a little pissed, right? We charge by the hour and we charge shitloads, so why didn't we get it right in the first place? Because it's reality. That's how it's done. You can never get it, or it's hard to get something right on the first place. And doing that in a transparent way that everybody can see, leads us to something that we call honest code. So honest code first means on the logic level, on the computer level, that the code is accurate, that is working nicely. But also on the client side, they see that, well, we had a mistake, but there is another set of eyes looking there, that we care enough, and the client feels more relaxed. And if the client is relaxed, you have less phone calls to the project manager. If the project manager is relaxed, the developer is relaxed, and the project continues in a much better way. Scrum, meetings, and deadlines. So a few years ago, I was consulting in a big company in Israel. They have like 3,000 people, something like that. Really corporate, a really corporate company. And they had this image or something really similar. Scrum comes like from rugby. And they had a title saying, in Scrum, in rugby, we move as a team together, and in Scrum, we move together, something giving the analogy of how we're doing it, and that is Scrum in their opinion. And honestly, if that's Scrum, if that means that every day I need to put my head around the asses of 10 sweating men, that's not the way I want to do Scrum. And this is, again, about finding the balance. Don't do Scrums for the sake of Scrum. So for example, again, with OpenSchool, with Harvard, we have 4 full-time developers working with their team, and we do not Scrum every day. We Scrum like 3 times a week. And we don't, show tickets or stuff like that. We just say, hello, how is it going? Do you have problems? And we continue. And a lot of clients, we don't need to talk with them every time, because they can see everything on GitHub. And we reach that honest code level that, well, it will just be a waste of time to talk with the client. I mean, the fact that, a lot of people think that the client wants to talk with you every day, that's not right. They just want to be updated. They just want to know that you're on it, right? They already chose you, so they're OK with you. So if you are able to remove that, then that would be great. Deadlines. That's one of the most, the topic that kills so many projects and the problem of time estimation. And I'd like to illustrate the problem of time estimation through the Jorge story. That's the Jorge story. I really had a vision how I want this slide to look, and that's actually that. So that's Jorge, not doing too much sports, somewhat low communication skills. He's in a relationship with an imaginary girlfriend for the past 2 years. You know the stereotype, right? And Jorge is starting a new project, and he has a new project manager. And the project manager, he comes to the room, and he... sorry, I didn't black out. I just realized that, I was hearing all this presentation, the keynote presentation about the gender diversity, and in my Twitter feed, I have, in the past 6 months, read so much about sexism in IT, and I just realized that I kind of fell to my own trap. The manager is a he, so apologies. So the manager, she walks into the room, and that's sexist too, right? I'm sorry, I'm a little confused by that. Is it sexist to talk about sexism? I don't know, and I'm really confused by the idea. And I just want to tell you the Jorge story. So I'll try to keep it as ambiguous as possible, okay? So the project manager, the project manager walks into the room, and they go like, hola, Jorge, hola. Yo soy el new project manager, proyecto managero. I didn't know that character lived inside me. So. Una pregunta, Jorge. Quanto tempo para add a new blog post in our CTO Internetio? And you know, Jorge is a typical cocky developer, and he's like, it will take me 1 hour. And obviously, it doesn't take 1 hour, right? Sometimes making coffee takes me more than 1 hour. So it takes longer than that. And obviously, they don't meet the deadline, and everybody is sad, and so on. So a few days later, the project manager again approaches Jorge, and they go, Jorge. That's silly, right? Jorge, ¿te acordás la última vez? No bueno, Jorge. No bueno. Another pregunta, Jorge. ¿Cuánto tiempo para moving a logo 1 centimetro un poco? And you know, Jorge is a smart guy, right? Last time he said 1 hour, and you know, they almost killed him. So it goes like 3 weeks. And you know, moving a logo one pixel is actually maybe the only thing that actually can take you 1 hour. And obviously, they didn't get the project because of the time estimation. What a story. We cried a bit. We laughed a bit. That's the Jorge story. And the conclusion is that never, ever, ever give your junior developers, don't ask them about time estimation. The only people that need to do time estimation are senior developers or people that really understand the implication of giving a wrong time estimation. And in order to help you do that, when you get a task, you need to break it to much smaller tasks. So most of the tasks that we have, we estimate it. I don't know, you know, building a website, it's pretty easy. You can't understand what is going on just by looking at the mock-up or something like that. So we say, that view, it will take me, I don't know, 4 hours, 5 hours. Don't ever say 1 hour. We all know views, right? You think it's simple clicks, but it's never like that. There's always the overhead. And if you get a bigger task, I don't know, like the maximum time we'll give for a task will be 12 hours, 15 hours, not more than that. If you have something more than that, then try to break it, because it's really, really hard to do big time estimation. Contribution. So this is one that I've actually kept to the end, right? Because when we think about the open source mindset, oftentimes we think about contribution. But I don't necessarily think that's the right thing. And I know that a lot of times people, when I talk with them about contribution, they are intimidated because, you know, I maintain organic groups and you know, some other high-profile models. So for that, I just want to show another slide. This is a gist, you know, just some code. It's not a repository. It's not nothing. It took me some time, more time that I'm willing to tell you, to find out how to do, I don't know, it's login with Angular into another Node.js server, whatever. I threw the gist over here, right? So I can use it, my entire Gizra team can use it. But the interesting stuff over here is that you can see that other people, I don't know who started it or forked it, right? People that are just using that. And that's contribution. That's fine. That's, I mean, OG or that, for me, it's like, it's the same. If you start doing that, even a gist, you're actually practicing your own best practices. Best practices isn't something you write in the doc and you give your new developer and he starts to read. Best practices is about having, you know, the notion of what is right, a kind of a reflex. And you know, something that in Gizra, we nowadays have 1 hour contribution for all the developers every day. And the funny thing is that not everybody, like some of the developers, we found out that they just didn't did it. They were too intimidated. So it's not natural. It doesn't come naturally for all the people. So it's okay, like, to lead them, and instead of telling them, okay, do whatever you want, give them, you know, tell them what to do. Or more importantly, tell them that even if you do something like that, that's awesome. You don't need to do anything else. And that, my friends, was the Gizra way. I guess that's the question part and the answer as well. So basically, like, the session is 45 minutes, and I have 10 minutes more. So if you don't want to ask questions, we'll have that embarrassing silence for 10 minutes. I mean, yep.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned through here is that you're using a lot of Angular. you guys at Gizra are doing a lot of, and doing with some success. I guess what you're doing is using Drupal through the Entity API to get stuff out of it?
You're getting technical. I'll answer. Yeah. Let's say it like this. Yes, we were successful with that. Yeah, we're doing something, but let's keep the technical stuff later on, because I intendedly not trying to get into, like, I think I barely said the word Drupal here even. Like, okay, so okay.
But yeah, maybe I'll take it offline for later. But just to find out if there's stuff that's out there, to find out how you're doing it right, because it looks like you are. Because a lot of people are having difficulty with it.
The way I'm doing it is, no matter what I'm doing, I'll do it publicly. So getting it right, I'll give you an example, which you asked me a technical question, but I'll answer through a non-technical stuff. So right now we are working on a model called RESTful, which is basically that, trying to decouple Drupal, keeping Drupal in the shades, in the backend where it's good, and move the UI into Angular. And from day one, I've opened the repository, and it's out there. And I was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was invited to give a presentation in DrupalCamp Spain, and I met Matteo there from Lullabot, and I told him, listen, dude, look at that model. If you like it, just give me one PR, one pull request. 3 weeks later, the man is on fire. It's like all over the place, right? It's like helping me out. I think he's doing more than me, actually. And that's a sign for me. If somebody like Matteo from Lullabot or Boyan that has already committed to help is saying, I want to help you, then that's an indicator for me that I'm on the right way. And how did I know it? Because other smarter people than me said, yeah, I think you're on the right path over here. Yep. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that you have an hour contribution every day. How did you pick that as opposed to, because sometimes it seems in development context, switching is wasteful. So that as opposed to just saying 1 afternoon a week.
Okay, so like that hour is really entirely from contribution. Write a blog post or do something of your models. But to answer how we're like along the day, sorry, another you were saying about context switching. I mean, we're still a business, right? So we're paying for that contribution hour. I cannot give more than 1 hour. I mean, imagine like 15 developers, 1 hour every day, all month long. It has its cost. That's what I can do. However, when we have a problem, we always tell the developers, if it will take you 1 hour to solve it in a custom way, or 3 hours to do it in a generic way where you can contribute, always go with the 3 hours. If it will take you 7 hours to do it in a generic way, go with the custom. Okay, so again, it's about finding the balance.
But I think he's asking, why is it an hour a day as opposed to 5 hours on a Friday? Probably that's not the right.
First of all, we don't work on Friday. We're working Sunday to Thursday. So that's like probably the biggest thing. I don't know, experience shows that, I mean, you know, you'd be surprised how much contribution can be done in 1 hour, the first hour of the day, and the amount of blog posts we started releasing in Gizra, thanks to that, the amount of patches, I mean, is a phenomenon. So maybe we're not doing it ideally, but again, it's balanced from our business needs and our wanting to help. But again, wanting to help is, you know, to fuel the business needs. Any other questions? Yeah.
Kind of on the transparency topic, like I love how you're inviting your clients to read the comment log on GitHub as a status update. I'm curious if you guys use like the GitHub's issue tracker to like invite kind of a feedback loop.
Yes. So everybody is on GitHub. We're not working on other system, and we actually we added a client. And it's not that I expect the client to read, like, you know, the update that the developer did over there. We're not expecting them necessarily to look at it. We just, I mean, it's part of, you know, that's practicing. That's the reflex. You did something for 1 hour, you write an update, even if it's not ready yet, right? I'm not waiting to open a pull request only after 3 days that everything is shiny. No, I'm going to do it after 1 hour. And yes, whenever I need the client, I will, you know, I'll mention his name over there. I have a question, and, you know, it's working. I think we have a few clients here in the audience, so you can find them. And And they will tell you if they like it or not. But I think they're still clients, so maybe they like it. Yeah.
What's your strategy for convincing the client? I mean, the honesty of code has an obvious benefit to the client, right? But what's the strategy for convincing clients that their code on their project should be open? For example, I went through a number of case studies. One in particular, we seem to solve all of the media handling problems for Drupal. And the question is that inevitably asked, like, is this getting contributed back? And the answer for large enterprise clients are, well, it's complicated.
Yeah, that's a combat we're not even trying much. It's mostly in regards to the mentality of the client. So we'll tell them, listen, you could do it, but if you don't want to, that's fine. I mean, anyhow, a lot of code would be contributed. They don't even need to know about it because it's done in such a generic way. So this is something that, I mean, if it fits their needs. I mean, when I came, for the UN, for example, there was a project which is a closed source project, and I told them, listen, this is from public money, and you're building a distribution for developing countries and so on. So why not open source it? I mean, why? I mean, and it was just a decision of, okay, let's open source it, and that's it. So, but again, this is not something I'm gonna put my foot on. Any other questions? Yeah.
I haven't listened to your podcast yet, which that's totally changing now because this is awesome. But we use OG7 a lot, and you're maintaining it. Can you speak to what's the future of OG7? How's it going to tie to Drupal 8? I know that's kind of a broad subject, but can you give me a little state of the union on it?
Yeah, but after the session. Because it's not that interesting. Yeah, you'll have OG for Drupal 8 and it's going to work.
Good answer.
Yeah. All right, I think we're good. So thank you for coming for this intimate, unplugged session, and see you next time. Thank you.